I remember I was looking out on my balcony when I was 22. All I could think about was how I just didn't want to be alive. A lot of my decisions have been in the face of my mortality because it's like apparently the only thing that get me to move. Is my opinion of what my father thinks of me more valuable than what I think of me? My dad called me, and this is after we had probably taken home 20 million. He was like, "Hey, you might want to hear this." And I was like, "What?" I like stepped out from dinner. I was like, "What?" He was like, "You ready?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like,
When you're starting these businesses, did you just figure out a formula and then you make sure these businesses fit that formula? Or did it just so happen that you'd start a business and you're like, how can we get these leads without paying for it?
in terms of the check boxes for a business, I have 5 that I look at.
What do you think's been the scariest moment along your journey so
I
far?
would sit there in an empty gym being like, what the fuck am I going to do? That was by far emotionally the hardest. And I think it was because I was the most alone.
Do you think you would have made it without Layla? How many years of knowledge would you say is packed into this?
Thousands. I mean, it's just our knowledge scaling our businesses rather, for the last decade.
And how many mistakes do you think you made along the way?
A lot. I can directly attribute probably like $7 million in profit of mistakes that I did not make just from like one chapter in that book.
Do you think that most of the mistakes you made, do you think it's from your own experience, or do you think it's from like hiring other people and then doing what they say, but it doesn't work out the way you thought it would? Or but maybe it's a mix.
It's a good question. I would say, sure, it's other people's stuff, but like I've also listened to other people. So it's not like I can like write other people off. It's just, especially when you're starting out, you have mentors and coaches and things like that. And part of it is taking other people's experience, at face value and going for it. And a lot of the things earlier on did work out for me. I think as we got much bigger, a lot, and I know that you found out later, how much we were doing for a much longer, period of time than most people knew. Um, the people who were giving advice hadn't even made the amount of money that we had made. And so it was just very difficult for me to find people whose perspective I could trust. And that was a very difficult thing for probably like a 2 or 3 year period, which is, why we started acquisition.com and whatnot to hopefully provide that for people who are going from 10 million to 30 million to 50 million, et cetera.
Yeah, was it hard to find those people? I'm genuinely curious. Like I've had that same feeling and I'm not at your level. So that's how I felt was when I was looking for people, is trying to find those individuals who are truly at that level. Was it hard for you to find them?
Yes. But I think you can get there, like as much as like there's periods of time where you have to grind and like put your shutters on. I think you execute until like all of the things that you have wanted to execute are executed. And then I think you have to look back up again and look around and to like, okay, I need more information and new frames and new lenses, to see what I can't see right now. Cause like, I always think like, if I were to talk to Elon Musk, like I wouldn't want to ask him questions. I would just say like, what do you see that I don't see from my perspective, given my resources, skills, and character traits that you would recommend I should do given what you see? Because I wouldn't want to ask, my questions are stupid. You know what I mean? Candidly, it's like, there was an acquaintance of mine who ended up sitting down with a guy who was a billionaire at the time, and he was really fresh in his career, and he was in the fitness space, and he ended up spending like the whole lunch asking about where to source equipment from. And he always looks back at how stupid it was that these are the questions that he was asking this man, but it's because he just didn't know any better, right? And I think that that's what I try to avoid when I'm talking to people who have experienced a different level. Is I try and get them to ask the questions that I should be asking.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I'm on the same mind frame where when I'm trying to ask someone ahead of me, it's like, is this a good question? Because I sit there in a debate. I'm like, this sounds like a good question. Like, no, that's a dumb question. That's like stupid. How do you get better at that? Do you feel like it's a skill you've learned over time?
100%. I think asking good questions is probably the single greatest skill that an entrepreneur can have, because asking a good question shows depth of thought. Like in my opinion, you can tell how intelligent and at what level someone's at based on their questions, far more than the answers. And if you ask bad questions, you get bad answers. And if you ask stupid questions, you get stupid answers. And so I think a lot of times, like even when we're looking at our business, right, and there's a circumstance or a situation or a problem that arises, a lot of times it's like they'll ask like even my team will ask a question. I'm like, do you think that's the right question to be asking right now?
Yeah.
Because usually it's not important at all. It's a totally different question we should be asking. Like, and I'll give you a fun example. So I had a very close friend of mine. She does about 50 million a year, and she takes about 20 home. And she came to me and she was like, Alex, I need your brain. And I was like, okay, what's up? And she said, I need you to show me how I can make $5 million in extra profit without doing anything extra. And in 60 minutes, we did it. And then she made an extra 5 million. She actually made an extra 4.5 million from one change in pricing. Oh. And so because, but like the thing is it was so evident because she wasn't like, how can I grow top line? It's like, well, duh, there's a million ways to grow top line, right? But she was like, how can I, and she adds constraints to her questions. And so a lot of times now, the questions I have constraints, and the goals that I have constraints. How can I get to 100 million working 2 days a week? Can you do 100 million? I know what I need to do. But how do I do it doing 2 days a week? You think different.
Yeah. No, I love that. I mean, that makes total sense. Is there behind that, you just said 2 days a week, like is it more of the challenge for you, or is there a reason you would do it like in 2 days a week is just an example, but is there a reason behind that, or is it just more to have the challenge?
It's so like many things, I think there's multiple reasons behind it. So one is I think it would be a fun challenge. The second is I know how to accomplish things through sacrifice, but I know that when I accomplish things through sacrifice, I end up resenting the thing, and I don't want to resent the thing. And so to then shift the perspective outwards, the only games worth playing are games that you can continue to play. So it's like, if I'm helping Susie lose weight and I help her lose weight for 6 months and then she drops off and then gains all the weight back, who cares? And so I'd rather have Susie just walk every day if she can absolutely keep walking. And if she does that for the rest of her life, I've genuinely added 10, 20 years to her life and probably made her truly fit in a way that's reasonable and acceptable over the longer period of time, which is the only thing that matters. And so for the business component, it's like, I know that the person who can stay at it the longest, most of the time will win, because it's just, there's too much time under the bar. It would be unreasonable for me not to win because I just have too much more experience than everyone else. And so if that's the objective, is like, how can I play this game the longest? Then the question is, how can I do that? And so for me, it's like, all right, well, if I spend 2 days a week in truly working, I'm going to put quotes here, because the other days I'm obviously doing stuff. I'm writing the book, I'm recording videos and things like that. But those are things that are like, I love doing those things.
Right.
Like those are, I genuinely enjoy. And if I don't feel like doing it, I won't do it. Was that?
I was saying not like actually inside the business, just other tasks.
Yeah, exactly. And those are fun, creative flow tasks for me. Like those are fun. And so that was the idea, is like, if I can create the structure under which, or circumstances under which I could continue to do this for perpetuity, then I will win, because I won't quit or switch gears. Because that's usually, I mean, entrepreneurs don't really quit. They just change shit because they just can't stand it anymore.
Right. I was going to ask you, do you think part of your fitness background is why you're so successful? Do you see that trend among people who have a strong fitness background and maybe business success?
I actually don't think so at all. I don't think they're related. I think that people who have work ethic then can learn fitness, but most people who are really into fitness, this is what I think is kind of interesting. I think people who are really into fitness actually are really into fitness and never really developed the work ethic. They actually just do it because they like it. And so then they expect, and they preach that. They're like, I have discipline. I'm waking up at 5. I'm like, you love taking pictures with your shirt off. You love going to This is not you showing it. Because here's the thing. That same person won't fucking do 100 messages every day.
Right.
They won't cold call. They won't message. They won't run ads. They won't do the stuff that they're supposed to do because it's hard. And so they think that because it's hard for other people to do fitness, that because they do fitness, they are hardcore or disciplined. When in reality, they just have a preference or a proclivity to doing something that other people just tend not to do. But if you find me an entrepreneur who's a winner and who has the work ethic, and then you say, hey, go into fitness, that person will be successful. They might not become a bodybuilder because they're not super passionate about it, but they'll get fit.
Yeah, I love that perspective. What do you think is been the scariest moment along your journey so far? I have a guess what it might be from reading your book, but I'm curious what you think.
Actually, the worst part, so I know that, I think you might have read the Gym Launch book. It's like the worst and most painful period was when I started the first gym. That was by far emotionally the hardest. And I think it was because I was the most alone. Like I traveled to a new area. I didn't know anyone. Like when people left, it was just me. I had no friends, I had no family, I had no nothing. And so I would sit there in an empty gym being like, what the fuck am I going to do? And it was terrifying. You know what I mean? But I was so insecure and of fearing failure and feeling the judgment of what I thought other people would say about me, that was like the only thing that really compelled me. And so it was kind of that pain that I was running away from. The second probably hardest time was the one that I talked about in the book, where I basically lost everything. That was pretty shitty too.
What I read from the book, and I have a later question on it, but I feel like, my parents had similar feelings about business and so forth as yours did, and I didn't feel a lot of support. Do you think do you see a trend among successful people who almost like they're running from not being a loser or not being disapproved of, in a sense? Because I know how you said that was 100% my motivation.
Yeah, I think it's different for, like you look at Michael Jordan, and for him it was the comparison to his brother, right? And so I think I'll rewind real quick. I think humans experience pain, and then it just takes certain types of people take the pain and let it beat the strength into them, and other people take the pain and let it beat the strength out of them. And they blame the person who caused that pain as the reason they are not successful, rather than saying, I will not give this person power anymore over my life. And so as a result of the pain that they beat into me, I will become stronger, and I will prove them wrong, or whatever it is. And I think that most people, though, the level of success, I think in some way in the beginning is proportional to the pain that you experienced. But then I do think that there is a switching point, because once you have satisfied, and I think that you're rubbing into this like right now in some of the conversations we've had, it's like there comes a point where you're like, it's not really reasonable for anyone to say that I'm not successful anymore. It's not, and like, there's no more marginal utility for money. Like another $1 million or another $10 million truly changes nothing about my life. And so then I think that the motivation has to change. And I don't think it happens overnight, but I think that it does switch from a fear-based drive to a pool-based drive. And as a fun quote that I like a lot is that most people don't know the difference between fear and motivation. Most people they conflate the two. They assume the feeling they have right now, maybe some people are listening to this, that drive, they might think it's motivation, but it's actually fear. And then when fear is gone, because you've satisfied all of your needs, then they don't know what motivation actually feels like, because it feels different.
That's a good point. I see even on like your YouTube channel, that thing took off like a rocket ship, bro. I think the thing that resonates with people is just your thoughts are like, it's almost like, where did you get this perspective? Do you feel that a lot of your thoughts now come from just, obviously building a business to your size, you have to gain perspective, but is it more the people you've been around? Is it the books you've read? Or is it just literally just the experience of doing it?
I think I spend a lot of time not doing much. So counter to the grind culture, most of my day is empty. I don't have anything after this. I didn't have anything till noon today. 3 days a week, I have nothing on my calendar. So, and so a lot of time, I occupy my time just reading stuff that that seems interesting. And they're usually totally disparate books. And it could be anything from like religious stuff to pricing to whatever. And I also think that my closest friend, Dr. Kashi, is basically a philosopher. And he and I spent a long time talking about ideas. And I think a lot of that comes into the context of death. Honestly. So we talk about death a lot because I think a lot of people don't like talking about death, but in doing that, I think we get a lot of perspective on like what is important and why. And so that's been helpful for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. When putting together offers, getting back to your chapter in your book, do you think people have a natural tendency to make them complicated or not to listen? Like when I read it, it just seems so clear, but do you still have people who fight you on it or try to overcomplicate it?
I don't know, really almost no one's fought me on the book. Like every person is like, we've gotten a lot of good feedback from the book, and so not really. I haven't had a lot of I haven't had any negative feedback from the book, so I'm like waiting for that. But no, I think it's a fairly clear structure, and most people just see at least 2 or 3 elements that they could include in their offer to make it more valuable. And most times when people, like as a thought experiment for everybody who's listening to this, the offer, in my opinion, besides the marketplace you are selling to, is the most powerful lever you have on how much money you're going to make, right? At least on the ability to sell stuff, which obviously is a skill in of itself. But if you have a really good offer, it's much easier to sell, right? It makes your job easier. And so if I were to say, for example, to anyone here, hey, I will double your business in the next 30 days, guaranteed, or I'll pay you twice what you paid me, right? That's it. That is an offer structure. There's an outcome, there's a timeline, there's a guarantee, right? And I'm only taking 2 people, right? There's some scarcity for you. And so just like that, that would probably be right now a compelling offer to most people here, right? And depending on the price, they just have to factor it into what doubling the profit or doubling their business would value to them. If you're making 10 grand a month and I charge $1 million for that, then it might not make sense. But if you're making $1 million a month, then it totally makes sense, right? And so then it's a very easy decision for the prospect. It doesn't take a lot of salesmanship. It's just a simple decision, right? Best case, worst case, here it is, right? And so if that's the extreme example, then if we take that extreme and just say, how many steps backwards do we need to take until we arrive at something that's reasonable?
Scalable.
Yeah. I would say reasonable first and then scalable second, because maybe a certain percentage of people listening to this, it's so funny. There was a guy who I went to high school with. He got furloughed because he was a chiropractor. So he graduated from chiropractor as a doctor of chiropractor, and then got furloughed like the next month after COVID, and was like, bro, I need to make money. And I was like, do you want to make money being a chiropractor, or do you want to make money? And he was like, I'd rather just make money. And I was like, okay. So we just put him in gym lunch, and I said, just sell weight loss. And I'll pay it. Swear to God. And so he's selling, and it's literally 90 days later, he's doing 20 grand a month, and he's stoked, right? And so, but the reason that I brought this up was that before he started making the money, he was like, hey, here's my offer. I'm trying to put these pieces together. I'm afraid that, if I give away too much, it's not scalable. And I was like, bro, you don't have any clients. Yeah. I was like, what scale issues are you worried about right now? You have no clients. So it's like, worry about scale later once you have cash flow. And to prove the point of how much I believe in this, I spent 2 years launching gyms. So people were like, Alex, how'd you build such a big coaching business in gyms? It's like, because I launched gyms for 2 years. I flew out, I showed up at the front desk, and I sold memberships for 24 days. And then I flew out and did it again. And then I flew out and then I did it again. Right. And then I had other guys that were flying out with me. So I was running a sales team and doing that. They're like, how are you so good at it? It's because I did it so many fucking times. Right. And so I think so many people aren't that good at the thing that they think they're good at, which is why they don't make any fucking money. Right. Yeah. And so anyways, rant over. But in terms of scalability, I think it is far better to get good at the thing and think, how can I provide so much value that this person wouldn't say no? Get the yeses, get the cash flow, and then determine what people find valuable, what they don't find valuable, and then peel back the offer until you still have the ultra valuable stuff, but you can pull back some of the things to make it a little more scalable.
Yeah. That's a good perspective. In fact, I mean, I didn't do the gyms, but I did do the online.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what made it. And in fact, it got to that point where I had to start deciding, am I going to do low ticket fitness or am I going to go more high ticket? And, I had like trainers lined up out the door that were like, hey, can you do this for me? And that's actually how I got into this. I never thought I'd get into this. Back to your point of what you just said, something I found interesting that you keep bringing up is when you talk about scaling, getting to the next level, is not doing too much, right? So not having too many offers, not getting too convoluted. So is there a litmus test to know when you're adding in too much to your offer? So let's say you have a coaching offer and then you throw in the agency and then you do this done for you and then emails and all of a sudden you have all these offers. Is there a litmus test to that to know when it's a good idea and when it's not a good idea?
It's a good question. I think it's a really good question.
Gotta have one a day, man.
Yeah, it's a really good one. I wish I gave a perfect answer, but I don't know if I have one. Yeah, I don't want to give a false answer. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like I know it when I see it, you know what I mean? But in terms of like, what framework would I use to say this is too much or too little? Most times the easiest litmus test that it's like if we're going big picture, the easiest litmus test that I would think of is, are we changing avatars? That'd be the first litmus test. The second would be, are we changing place in the market? And so there's 4 major strategic positions in any marketplace. You've got ultra low, which is like what you can, like VAs for $400 is ultra low priced, right? Then you've got your low price, which is Walmart, right? And then you've got premium, which is more expensive than the average stuff. And then you've got luxury, right? Where demand increases as a result of status and price, where the higher the price is, the more the status that's associated with it. Now, people who might be listening to this might think they're in luxury, but they probably aren't. They're probably in premium, which like your program, my program, they are premium products. They're not luxury products, right? No one has statuses associated with how much they paid you, right? And so if I were changing where I sit on that graph, then that would be another thing where I would say, okay, we still want to occupy one position, number one. Number two, we want to serve one avatar. And I think part of the reason that the question is so difficult to answer is that there has to be context behind it. So like right now we have 6 businesses that we're in, like heavily in, right? And so you're like, people might hear that and be like, well, Alex, I thought you told me to focus on one thing. And the answer is yes, but it's also at what point do I have the skill set and character traits that would allow me to do these other things? And so I think like when I started my second business, which was Prestige Labs, I did that out of sequence. I should not have done it as soon as I did it. Now that I have it now, it took me a long time of failure and suffering during that period of time of transition of being CEO of 2 companies that I can now see that in retrospect. I don't know how things would have turned out differently, et cetera. But I think that there's a skill set thing. Could you have multiple offerings if you have champions for each of those product lines? Yes, I think so. Because if you can run multiple companies, you can run multiple product lines. But most people don't have the skill set to do it. So as a broad statement, for most entrepreneurs who are under $10 million a year, I say focus on selling one product and one channel. And then the second, going from 3 to 10 million, is just increasing the back end lifetime gross profit per customer.
Yeah. With your businesses, the thing that impresses me the most is the fact of scale, how much scale you've had with essentially, and I may be wrong, but in your portfolio, I still believe you don't run hardly any ads. That's accurate, right? Overall?
That is accurate. Well, one of the companies runs a lot of ads, not Gym Launch. Different company runs a lot of ads.
One of 6. So to me, that's the most impressive. And the reason is I thought my profit margins were high. And then I heard yours and I go, well, shit, I guess if I didn't run ads, they'd be that high too. So, but then what impresses me further is the amount of scale. So when you're starting these businesses, did you just figure out a formula and then you make sure these businesses fit that formula? Or did it just so happen that you'd start a business and you're like, how can we get these leads without paying for them?
I think it's both those thought processes, honestly. Now, in terms of the check boxes for a business, I have 5 that I look at. So it's my little moniker. It's unique, expensive, sticky air, and managed with a person of integrity who has a long-term mindset. So those are the 5 things. So I'll unpack it real quick. So unique is like, is there something that we have a unique thing that only we can do, that we have a unique, and it might not even be the thing that's different, but do we have a unique story that can still differentiate us? Like for me in Gym Launch, there's nobody who's had as many gyms as I have, or who did 2 years of turnarounds. That's a unique angle that I know that I'm better at, right? Expensive is going to be just a function of pricing. And it's more than it is expensive in absolute terms. It's more, what is the gross profit of the business, right? Which has a function to do with the second thing, unique, expensive, sticky air. And the air is the 4th thing, is basically no marginal cost. How can I sell something that costs almost nothing, right? So that I don't want to have 80% or 90% margins. I want to have 97.5% gross margins. And the difference between a 90% gross margin business and a 95% gross margin business is twice. That's what everyone fucks up. A 95% gross margin business is twice as profitable as a 90% gross margin business, because it means I would have to sell twice as many units, right? Or for each increment of cost, I can sell 2 versus 1. And that is why it's twice. It's not 5%, right? And everyone messes that up. So unique, expensive, sticky is how can I make it recurring and have some sort of habit forming component to it? And either it's recurring because of the model or because of how good the product is. So how can I have some element of recurring that's going to come into it, right? So unique, expensive, sticky air, those are the 4, and then managed by someone who has integrity, who has a long-term perspective. And that way they'll make the right calls at the right time and not sacrifice short-term for a quick pop. And so that's in terms of like the businesses that I'm looking at. In terms of the question about how do we have such low ad spend related to our revenue? So this has been evolved over time, having spoken with all the guys I know who are worth 250 million and up, right? What was interesting to me is that the vast majority of them want to do one-time inputs with compounding returns. And so most people do the opposite. They do things that they have, like spending money on advertising. For example, you have to come up with a whole campaign, you have to write all the copy, you have to put money in it, and then it stops working eventually, right? Then you have to do it again, and it stops working eventually. Now contrast that with, I'm going to write a book, and it has to be so good that on its own, if I give it to 10 people, that more than 10 people will get it as a result of those first 10 people. So then so each of those 10 people sends it to 2 people, and those people send it to 2 people. And so right now, this book was almost a test for me of that concept, given the book and the course. And that has actually worked. So I made 1 post on Instagram, and that was my promotion. I've run no ads for this book, and it's selling 1,000 copies a day.
Insane, man.
It's nuts, right? I mean, 1,000 copies, you can multiply the math. Like, it's a lot, right? But there's no advertising. None. And so when you look at, to round that point off, if you look at the 6 ways of getting customers, right? So you have paid ads, you have earned media, which is the followers that we all have, right? We have owned media, which is all the people who've given us permission to contact them. So all of our the followers in their inboxes, the DMs, et cetera, your phone contact, CRM. And then you've got manual outbound. I know you know this. I'm just saying this for everyone else. Manual outbound, which is the actual cold DM. So same concept, but we're doing it on a one-on-one basis to people who haven't given us permission. We have affiliates. So people already have the pool of customers that we have that we can partner with and make a full integration to their business so that they can keep sending us new clients. And then finally, you have word of mouth and referrals, right? Now, if I were to ask the audience, right, which of those is quadratic compared to which of those is linear, which of the 6 is which? They might think for a second. Because we're only talking and I can't see the comments, I will answer the question, right? Referrals, word of mouth, is the only one that is quadratic. So if I put $1 into advertising and I get $10 back, then I put $100 in, I get $1,000 back. It is linear in the relationship, right? It's a straight line. Same thing with outbound. If I do 100 calls versus 200 calls versus 1,000 calls, I have the same response rate, more or less, law of large numbers. With referrals, if we make the product good enough, then I can give it to 1 person, and that person gives it to 2, 2 give it to 4, 4 give it to 8, and then it multiplies. It's quadratic, right? And so when I look at the people who make the most money, they spend all of their time, or a disproportionate amount of their time, truly getting product market fit. And a lot of people talk about product market fit, but they don't actually ever achieve it. They get their idea of product market fit is that people are buying it. That is not the way that product market fit is actually determined. Product market fit is actually determined based on the fact that these customers stay and continue to pay and want to buy more. That's how you find product market fit. And so the idea is we should be promoting just enough to keep fixing the product until the product itself does enough selling for us that it becomes a virtuous cycle. But most people just learn how to make that first dollar and then try and max out. And then they're really disappointed by the fact that they're not making as much money or profit as they'd like to make, and then also feel shitty about things. And so when I look at that, if I'm trying to build something that has compounding returns, it's like, how can I take a one-time effort and really go all in on the product? I know enough about promotion now to make sure that I can get the first sales through, and then keep tweaking this until eventually it is good enough that I get an outsized return on any effort I do. And then at that point, I'll turn the other ones on. Because then it becomes because then making the advertising profitable is basically inevitable, because for every customer I'm getting 1 or 2 more customers.
Yeah, the biggest lessons I've learned from you recently is, I mean, simply I've seen that. So I'm like, what can I do different to where I don't have to market so hard? Because I can market. But I cannot outbeat that performance with marketing. And then also it's wrapping my head around, okay, maybe these offers, what do I have to do to change these offers? What new offer would I need to hit that criterion? Because I have a lot of experience, I think it's easier for me to wrap my head around that. But that to me is like, what I've seen is it's like he's doing stuff in a way where it's like almost funny, where it's like we don't really have to do anything to sell this. The cold calling, especially, I think is absolutely ridiculous, right? That you can call someone, the offer's so good, you're just like, yeah, like we'll just kind of do it with you, whatever. If it doesn't work, pay us. And they're like, all right, like we'll do it. And it's brilliant. It's brilliant. One of the questions I wanted to ask is, you know, in the book, and I understand this, but you said if your company isn't growing, it's dying. And I think some people don't understand that. They think like, well, my company's here, like it's not. Can you give maybe an example, because you said it really black and white in the book, that people can understand what you mean by that statement?
So if you look at the marketplace in general, the marketplace is growing at 10% a year, right? And so if you are not growing by 10% a year, relative to the market, you are shrinking. And so that means that you are dying. And I use grow or die as a very polarizing term because it's memorable, right? But fundamentally, most businesses, if they are not adapting or innovating, will get outpaced by the marketplace and then eventually vanish into nothingness. And so the idea is that we must continually grow and must continually innovate to keep our product sharp and top of the game.
And have you ever had a time in your business where I finally saw it this year, where I felt like this was the first year where I was like, man, I got to start changing or we're not going to keep going up. Have you had that happen in your business at all?
Well, yeah, I got kicked in the nuts during COVID because I served gyms. But
I didn't know you. I didn't know you well enough then, but I remember I said a distinct prayer and I was like, "Thank you, Lord, I'm not Alex Hormozi during this."
So yeah, you know what I mean. I've definitely experienced it.
In the book, your dad questions whether what you were doing were legal. After one of the pictures from your events. So you didn't initially have that support from your family. What would you say to people who are watching and are kind of in that same boat? And I see this a lot with beginners to how to deal with that, because I think it's easy to maybe say now, but I know when I started, I don't know how you felt, but I got very close to quitting a few times, which in retrospect is crazy, but getting kicked in the nuts over and over is tough. How did you deal with it, or how would you deal with it?
Such a visual, just getting kicked in the nuts over and over again.
Especially you.
So, I'll briefly share the story that got me started, because I think it might have relevance. Because for me, the hardest decision was actually quitting my job. So that was the hardest decision I had to make, because I was actually a very good student. I graduated from Vanderbilt magna cum laude in 3 years, and I got a good job as a management consultant. And I got paid good money. And so I pretty much had done everything that I was told to do up to that point. I was president of a fraternity. I was editor of the things, like I did all that stuff. Right. And so I'd followed everyone's path and I was miserable. And so I remember I was looking out on my balcony because I owned a condo in a high rise. I was 22. And all I could think about was how I just didn't want to be alive. And so and that's why I say, like, a lot of my decisions have been in the face of my mortality, because it's like apparently the only thing that get me to move. And so when I was faced with the fact that, like, I was like, if I'm driving tomorrow, I was like, I could just accidentally go in the other lane and, like, it would be all right. Like no one would know, it would be fine. And I wouldn't wake up and it would be over. Right. And so the thing is like this kind of passive ideation was something that, like, occupied a lot of my time. And so I was like, it got to the point where I was in so much pain of just living this existence that I didn't want to live, that I was like, well, at least if I start a business, it'll be doing something that I like, and I won't be thinking about fucking killing myself every day. And so that was kind of like, when I was faced with my mortality of like, well, I've got the judgment of my parents. I was like, or I could die. And I was like, well, I guess judgment of parents is better than death. And so that was how, like, straight up, that was how I made the decision. But then even when I did make the decision, I still had the same level of, like, fear of failure and judgment. And I told you so. And I've been right all along, and you should have listened to me, that I never wanted to hear. And so when I started the business, it was just that fear that I just, like, I had so much anxiety every hour of every day, which is why I didn't take a vacation until December of 2019.
Yeah, I can relate to a lot of that. And I remember distinctly after, finishing football, that was my whole life. I just want to play in the league. I mean, I was in engineering class, I had a year left, and I was like, I can't, this just is not going to work. And it really hit me, because that was like I was looking at that for the rest of my life. So I can 100% relate to that. I didn't even know that part about your story that young.
Yeah. And to answer the question, for the people who are struggling with, like, their parents' stuff or their sister or whoever that person is, like, I think because, like, a lot of people are like, I'm so afraid of what people think. But if you really narrow it down, there's only like 2 or 3 people whose opinions you actually care about. And maybe it's just one. And so then if you can actually just narrow it down, instead of making it the faceless, like, everyone's opinion, but, like, who's that one person whose opinion you care about, then it's asking a more pointed question, which is like, is my opinion of what my father thinks of me more valuable than what I think of me? Yeah. And I think if you can answer that question, and hopefully it's like, I think what I think is more important, then you can take that first step. I mean, I remember my dad called me, and this is after we had probably taken home 20 million at this point. You know what I mean? This is a few years ago. And he was like, hey, you might want to hear this. And I was like, what? I, like, stepped out from dinner. I was like, what? He was like, you ready? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, I'm sorry. First time he's ever apologized. And I was like, and I was like, for what? He was like, for everything. He was like, you were right. He's like, but in my defense, if it had been in my time, I would have been right. And I was like, and what was interesting was,
Wait, are you saying sorry, Dad?
right? But I remember when he said that to me, though, that my response was, I was like, you rooting for me now when literally everyone else in the world has already recognized that I am good at this means nothing. And I was like, if I cared about your opinion, I would have never quit to begin with. And I was like, when people can stand on stage and the first thing they say is, hey, mom and dad, thanks so much for always being there and believing me. I was like, I'm not going to fucking say that because you weren't. And I was like, so I'm glad that that's apology made you feel better. I was like, but your opinion stopped mattering to me a long time ago. And so that was the conversation that I had with my father. Hopefully it was, less targeted than that for everyone here. But I guess, what conversation do you want to have? And if you never quit, then you won't fail. And that is that's the prerequisite of entrepreneurship. If you do not quit, you won't fail. And so they can never say, I told you so, until the moment that you give up.
Yep. I think, sorry, man, that just resonates with me so much. Like, that's the number one thing. Like, I say that all the time. I'm like, as long as you don't quit and you don't have a mental disability, seriously, and you can make decisions like that didn't work, don't do that again, you eventually will hit success. It's just time. That's it. It's just time. Do you think you would have made it without Layla?
So I had 6 gyms before I met Layla. You know what I mean? So I think I had a reasonable level of competence, but I wouldn't have made it as big, or it would have taken me much longer.
Yeah, I mean, was it easier with her?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, everything blew up when I met Layla, and that's because I always had half the equation, right? I didn't have the other half, and so half the equation is marketing and sales, right? And she had product operations fulfillment, and so that was, once I had that piece, because I could always outsell my problems, but I just couldn't keep people. I didn't get that part yet, which might be funny for people listening to this compared to how I just talked about the first half of this talk, right? But it's because I've learned that lesson, right? I've learned how much more powerful it is to not have to tell you. It's so much more profitable to make the products exceptional and then get people to buy over and over and over again. You make so much more money. And so although I came up from the marketing and sales perspective, I would no longer consider myself that. I'm just much more of a business person now. At least I consider myself that way. But having Layla as early as I did, I kind of got to leapfrog a lot of the pain I otherwise would have had to figure out the hard way. It was just like, you take all that stuff because I don't like dealing with that. And she was like, okay. And then she crushed it. And so by doing that, it just blew up. And then in retrospect, I was like, oh, that was really important. I need to make sure that that's always there. And so now when we create businesses, it's like front end, back end, shared ops, and we always have all three with everything that we do. And then that way they work on the first try.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, a lot of people, I feel like I got a good concept of what you do now, but everyone's always like, what's a day in the life look like, Alex? What do you do? So what does that kind of look like now that, you stepped out of most things and you're basically just being an owner?
I mean, it's like not a lot. I mean, I spend my time. Yeah. I mean, so like today I was reading this book, which is okay. It's not great. It's okay. I was writing these books. I still have book 2 and book 3 that are written. I'm just going through the editing processes now for those. The only things that are set on my schedule is that I meet with the CEOs of the acquisition.com companies. So I meet with those guys once every week or every other week. And that's the majority of those are my have to do's, and everything else right now. My focus right now is promoting the book. I wrote it, so I figure I should promote it a little bit. So that's pretty much, that's it. Like I have Saturdays and Sundays, there's nothing. I usually have 1 or 2 days of the week that are completely blank. Monday afternoons is when I do the meeting. So that was a nice tweak if you for everyone else here.
Okay.
Yeah. So number one heart attack time in the US is first thing Monday morning. And so a mentor of mine sold his company for $3.4 billion. He did heart rate variability on all of his executives, and he found out they were most stressed in the morning So he just pushed all the meetings back until afternoon and everyone was okay. And so I can tell you, it changes the feeling of everything. It's weird. It's so weird. I just don't work Monday mornings. And like my first meeting's at like noon.
That's so interesting. That's the first time I've heard that. I might have to try that. That's so interesting.
Dude, it's weird. It's trippy. Like you're like, I feel like I'm cheating. Like I'm not stressed right now. And so all of a sudden, no one else is stressed either. And then it eliminates this false urgency you feel because it's like, first thing, I got to do stuff on Monday morning. It's like, no, you don't. Like, because us deciding now versus 4 hours from now is going to change nothing. But like the stress levels go way down. So my Monday afternoon, spend like 3 or 4 hours in meetings. And then I have Thursday mornings. I do a little bit. That's it.
Final 2 questions, Alex. What's next for you? What's next for you? You got the portfolio companies. Are you just going to keep adding to it? What are you going to do next?
Yeah, it's all that's 100% my focus. Was like, how can I play something? So I spent probably 2 years trying to think about what the next thing was going to be. I know you and I have had offline conversations about this, but like, I really have no more marginal utility for money. So money only solves money problems. And once you've solved all the money problems that exist in your life, there's not a lot more that money can do. And I recently did my will, and my estate planner updated it. And like, I don't have kids, and all the stuff that I have, I'm going to be donating anyway when I die. So like, there's really no reason for me to like, for me, the idea of legacy is kind of silly because in 100 generations, my gene pool would be done even if I did have kids. And if I did have kids, I probably wouldn't give them the money because I think it ruins them, which means that I can't give the money to anyone anyways. And even if I did, in 100 generations, someone's going to remember who I was to begin with. So it doesn't really matter. So all that to say, I had to think like, what does my ideal day look like? And then how can I create a company that fits that? And it was like a 2-year, I still have a note on my phone that has like 11 different big business ideas of what I was going to do next. And then piece by piece, I started crossing them out until I was like, the acquisition.com one just kept feeling right. It kept coming back to like, I would have moments where I was like, this one might be cooler, but I would always come back to that one. And so that's why I think I'll be able to win with it, because I keep coming back to it. And I think that I'll be able to do it for a very long time. And so if I do it for a very long time, then I think it'll grow much bigger than anything else I've done. So for everyone who's listening, it's we're acquiring minority positions in education or training-based companies that are really 5 million plus, like 5 to 15-ish. The biggest company in the portfolio is doing 35. Smallest company is doing 8 million. So just for like context, but that's kind of the range. But 5 million plus is kind of at least where we kind of draw the line. But yeah, so we're looking at those companies and saying, hey, we've already done this like a zillion times now. So, helping someone get to 30 million or 50 million or whatever, like we understand how to do it.
Yeah, it isn't too difficult for you. So guys, Alex, thank you so much, man. Guys, make sure you go to Amazon, get his book. And then Alex, when do your next books drop? You can't make that stuff up.
The next book will drop when I think it's good enough that when people read it, they'll tell their friends.
Fair enough.
So, I think, it's done now. I have a whole rewrite in my head though. I've rewritten the second one 3 times now. So I'll probably end up rewriting it 2 more times. So I'll probably rewrite it 1 more time.
When you're writing it, Alex, are you doing pretty much the heavy work as well? Like you're not getting a lot of help.
I do everything.
That's
I do everything.
That's incredible. Yeah. Because it's a lot of work. People who are watching this, it's not easy to write a book, by the way. So incredible.
And a good book's even harder. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really So it's how can I make that, like, it has to be so simple and so digestible that, because like when I'm reading, because I've read this book a zillion times, because every time I edit it, I basically read it. It's like, where is it that my eyes I gloss over? Like, where is it where I lose interest, or where is it that it's like chunky and it's like, then I have to rewrite it and massage it, and how can I break this idea or give a different example? And I think what happened, the reason I like the writing stuff so much is because I get better. I get better at explaining the concept. So like my depth of understanding, my perspective on expertise is how deeply you understand the basics. I don't really think that there's a lot of advanced stuff in business. I think it's how deeply do you understand? Like people use the term value, right? For how long have you heard people say value and no one had a fucking equation for it? People were like, provide more value. I'm like, what does that mean? Right?
I mean, it's true. Like even that equation, if you took that whole book and you gave me those 2 pages, that was what I got out of the book. That was worth the read for me. Because I was sitting there going, So if I just do one of these 4 things, then that makes it better. And then it's easier to sell. And as soon as you start implementing it, or I have at least already, it's easier. It's hard.
It's just easier to, and so that's what's interesting about that is that it ends up creating scalable enterprise, right? Because like, you know how to build sales teams, I know how to build sales teams, right? But what really scales sales more easily, rather than having absolutely savage salespeople, and that's very important and good, and amazing sales training, is just giving an offer that would be so easy to sell. And then all of a sudden, you don't have to take nearly as much time to ramp up. You don't have as much cost in sales that are not closed by a new closer when you put them on the roster. Like, there's all these other costs that are mitigated when you have a much better offer. And people are more convicted about it because they believe in what they're selling.
Yeah, 100%. I've already seen that across the board. Well, dude, everyone, please get his book. Thanks so much for your time, man. I know you're just so busy today. You don't have any more time left on the schedule. Guys, be on the lookout. I think Alex is doing 10 books. 10 books.
Yeah.
Accurate?
Yeah.
He's going to be writing
10 books, 10 courses.
Absolute killer read. I loved it. That's part of why I wanted to do this. And he had a birthday yesterday, so spam his walls. Make sure to bother him. I think he's 22 or something today, so just make sure to give him some birthday love. All right,
I'll always be a little older than Tanner.
All right, guys, I'm gonna turn off the live stream. Till next time. See ya.